Okay, hi everybody. Today I am with Dr. Darren Stevens, who is a developmental psychologist. So Darren, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about developmental psychology?
My name is Darren. So there's a difference between an adult development and a child development. Normally when you think of developmental psychology, you think of Piaget and children. However, although Piaget does form the basis of some of what I do, really I look at cognitive complexity. So how adults think and how complex is their thinking. Okay. I also teach at university, but I teach more in the HRM field, so human resources, organizational behavior. And obviously for me, and I'm guessing everybody watching this as well, psychology permeates everything and everywhere. So it's kind of the underpinning of most of the things that we do anyway. So I try to sneak my theory and whatnot into the HR programs as well. So psychology goes everywhere with me. And I also finally run an international institute, which we'll probably talk about in a couple of more questions time, about how adults develop and how we deliver that kind of development.
Fab. So obviously you said that adult development is your specialism. So is there areas of that you have a particular interest in, or what drew you to adult development?
I want to know how things work, and people are things in that sense, and I want to know how people work. So how do they think? Why do they behave the way they do? So kind of I was naturally drawn towards psychology in that sense. And what I did was, my specialism is how self-awareness maps to cognitive complexity. So if you think about it in terms of the greater our complexity, the more profound our relationship with our thinking, and thus our self-awareness increases accordingly.
Okay. So obviously you said you work a bit with HR and you work for a university. Could you give us like a general explanation of what your career involves and a little bit more depth, maybe?
I run, for example, for my university, I run the apprenticeship program, so the CMDA, the Chartered Management degree, and that involves all aspects of getting apprentices in and developing programs and writing modules, even teaching on the master's degrees and MBAs and things, where I also teach, say project management, which sounds like 1,000 miles away from psychology. However, if you think about it, once you've got down the ideas of how to do project management, which is basically procedural thinking, right? What else have you got left? You've got people. So you have to learn how to manage the people. Guess where the psychology comes into the project management degree, right? So that kind of thing. I do lots of marketing as part of my Institute for Adult Development. I also have a team of people around me, and my research is in currently about 7 languages, and the website's in 4. So when we're looking at this from what can I do with my psychology degree potential, there's all kinds of things we can do that's not just in the UK, but all across Europe as well, if you're going to help people think and develop.
Amazing. I think the more we do these interviews with people, it really demonstrates how wide and how much, like you say, psychology is just integrated into every aspect of every career and everything without us even kind of realizing it.
Unconscious bias?
A little bit. Great. So obviously you said that you want to know about things and people and stuff like that. So can you just maybe give us an idea of, so when you started psychology right up to sort of where your career is now at this point and how it's kind of changed and developed?
That's a good question. In reality, I did my first degree in like 1938. And I did a business degree first. However, I did an HR specialization, which got me into organizational behavior and how people act and think in business. And then I was working for a large American company, and I moved into the people management rather than the IT side of things. And then it was all about people. So I thought, well, I'll do some NLP training, if you've heard of that, neuro-linguistic programming. But even when I got that, it wasn't enough to make a career out of it, because it's not necessarily well liked. So then it's like, well, you better go and do a psych degree, and then you might as well do a psych master's. And I did a master's in occupational psychology, and then I thought, you know what, I've got an idea here from the research that I was doing. I was interested in how people think and work, as I said, but really I wanted to understand how and why people think and behave the way they do. And then I discovered a bloke called Robert Keegan and another one called Otto Lasky, and they talk about cognitive and social emotional complexity. And it kind of changed my world, because I suddenly knew why some people behaved in one way whilst others behaved more deliberately in their thinking, which is also the name of my book that's coming out next year, Thinking Deliberately. All right.
It's a great little plug there. I like
Yeah,
it.
because we don't. And this is the point, Brittany, when we think about it, we don't actually think deliberately. We're psychologists, we do psychology, but how deliberate is our thinking? And it's that progressed and propelled me forward.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to look at it. So, I mean, separate to our recording, you talked a little bit about your YouTube videos that you do. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And just for students, I will pop a link to it when we publish these videos so that they can have a little nosy.
So you guys will probably all know that Piaget talks about disequilibrium, and and the phrase I like is we don't grow in the status quo. I think I made that up. Right? We don't grow in the status quo. So I love disequilibrium. I love disruption. The website, the Institute for Adult Development, and the YouTube page is all about how we disrupt existing psychology. So, for example, we talk about imposter syndrome. Well, there's a lot of research on that. I talk about how to deconstruct imposter syndrome so that you can reconstruct it in a different way. I talk about how trait theory might not be as useful as it sounds if we introduce something called intention, awareness, choice, and response. For example, can you choose not to be an introvert in the moment? Can you choose not to do neuroticism? If you can't, it's a habit. So it's more the disruption that I enjoy. Do you see what I mean? So all the things that we take for granted, and when you look at things like intelligence, you know, Gardner and all these other researchers, they're not necessarily universally agreed upon. So what can we find that unites? So my question was, well, what's the lowest common denominator in all of these things that unites and separates all of the intelligences? And I invented a new intelligence, which I didn't know you could just do, but anyone can do it. And I call it dynamic intelligence. And the website and the YouTube videos talk about the disruptive elements of these ideas to make psychologists think about what we're doing and how we're doing it. So it's not just clients.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting way to look at things. And I think it's really good for encouraging students to think, you know, obviously when you're writing, it's about criticality and thinking sort of outside the box, but being able to draw theory on it as well.
Yeah.
But like you say, that disequilibrium and kind of unpicking things a bit, that's what makes psychology interesting, I think. And what, you know, it's constantly evolving because people like yourself and other researchers and psychologists are picking things apart and looking at things from a different perspective. And I think that's one thing that is definitely a draw towards psychology for a lot of people.
Yeah, brilliant. And what you'll find is, the people watching this will know that they'll think in the same ways that you and I do. How do we work? How do we tick? What makes me think this way? And it's those kind of questions. And once you start to understand it about how you think for yourself, you get a relative idea of how other people might think.
Yeah. So what sort of research, what does it look like within your area at the minute? Are there any particular gaps, or is there any areas that are being particularly driven at the minute?
See, now the gap thing is an interesting one. There are some wonderful researchers, Otto Lasky, Robert Keegan, Suzanne Cook-Greuter, Michel Duval, all these people. They talk about stage development. Now, one of the things that I noticed when I was doing my research is that if you look for stages, guess what you're going to find? Stages. So one of the gaps is in my framework, I use cognitive heuristics, shortcuts in our thinking, not necessarily heuristics in the sense of tying your shoelace, where you just do it now that we're older, but how do you receive information and how do you filter information? It's those kind of cognitive shortcuts. The gap that I'm seeing is that when they talk about, the other researchers talk about how you move from a level to the next level up, they don't tell you specifically what to change in your thinking in order to grow vertically. My theory, constructed development theory, my theory does tell you what to change and how to change it. And that gap is my next research paper, which hopefully will disrupt the field. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not every day that you can get to disrupt the field. So how aware are you of your self-awareness, and how do you grow your self-awareness in a vertical direction to be more deliberate in your construction of self? And I even go so far as to say in some of my videos that personality isn't real. It's a choice. That kind of idea. So that's
Interesting
the kind of,
concept.
that's the research area that I want to go down, is how at choice are we in our personality?
Yeah. Well, that sounds really interesting. Look forward to reading that in the future.
Thank you.
So obviously you've talked a little bit about academia and working in like HR and things like that. What sort of fields are available for someone who's interested in following a developmental psychology sort of pathway?
I thought about this, and I've got some answers, like coaching and mentoring and development and working for L&D in a large organization. Sometimes therapy, my framework is being used by a couple of people to do therapy as well. However, I'm not a therapist, and I wouldn't profess to be. Even though I've got a PhD in psychology, I'm not a therapist. It's a difficult one because adult development, cognitive complexity, requires a certain amount of understanding. So you've got to get people to get it, and you've got to get people to understand it. So I think the market for what I do is quite small, in the sense that it's about developing people. You can do that in large companies. You can do it with your own business. A lot of the people that I work with have their own businesses doing coaching, developing, and mentoring, and construct. And basically, what I do is I go into organizations as well and have a set program that develops the board of directors, or develops how the middle managers think, and we grow their thinking in a vertical direction. And it is niche. So if students watching this are thinking of looking at adult development, which I would definitely encourage, understand that once you get out of here and get out of your university, the ideas behind it will take some grasping by the people that you're going to be talking with. So I'm not going to lie to you. You know, selling what I do is sometimes difficult because they've got to get the ideas. You know, it's different to therapy. Oh, is that all right, Brittany? Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
no, that's great, fantastic. So obviously a lot of our students are going through their PhD and starting to think about, what they're doing next. And for some students, they may have some psychology contacts through the university or their own personal connections. But what advice would you give about networking for students, either after they've graduated or even through this course that they're doing at the minute?
Well, it's really simple, but I'm quite bold. Contact everyone. Just get in touch with them. First of all, if someone contacted me and said, Darren, I'd like to talk about your research, yeah, of course I'm going to talk to you for hours and hours, right? But the point is, as soon as I finished my PhD, every main player that I referenced, I sent my PhD to them and introduced myself. I said, hello, my name's Darren. Look at this. Get it out to everybody. No one's going to come to you and say, would you like to work with us? No, get your stuff out there. Tell everybody about everything you're doing. Network everywhere. That's it.
Amazing. Yeah.
I met a guy last night, a complete random stranger. I told him about my research. That's how we do it.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's one of those things that I think you do have to have the confidence to do it, but once you start doing it, I know personally from finding people for these, like at first I was like, oh, they're gonna think I'm really weird. Like, can I just interview you? But actually, as you do it more, it becomes a lot easier. And I think once you start getting that positive feedback and people actually being like, yeah, I'd love to, you start thinking like, oh, actually, okay, I'm on the right track here.
Yeah.
I think
Would you like to talk about your research? Yes, please.
yeah. So speaking of research and studies, is there any recent studies or books, podcasts that you found particularly interesting or had some really good takeaways from them?
Well, obviously, Thinking Deliberately by Stevens next year will be useful.
Yeah.
From a developmental perspective, there's a lot of, as we're all noticing at the moment, there's lots of nonsense in the press about politics. Politics is not a very high level game. And when you get an outstanding, well, rather a high level politician, they're usually ostracized. So there's a book called The Listening Society by a guy called Hansi Freinacht. And and the reason I'm recommending it is because it's a difficult read, and I'm recommending it on purpose. Because it will make you think about your thinking whilst thinking about politics, which doesn't sound very interesting, but thinking about your thinking is interesting. And then if we can get to the point where we've got a more collaborative global picture in how we think about politics, then all the ideas of how politicians think, like very, very short term, will eventually disappear. And the young people watching this now might in 10 years' time be influenced by a book on how to think complexly about politics. Will change the UK system as far as I'm concerned. So that'll be a book I'd recommend, The Listening Society.
Fantastic. That sounds really interesting. I like the way that it's almost like planning ahead and putting it forward into the future, which is a really good approach to things. So fine, I'm nearly there. Final question. Do you have any advice for our graduates?
I'm not always good with advice, really. However, the one thing I would suggest is if they wanted to understand how they think, and it was part of my research, I profiled 200 master's level students, and there is a predominant thinking style that would work within academia. So if students want to understand how they think, they're welcome to get in touch with me and do an identity compass profile, and it deconstructs their thinking into 50 cognitive intentions, which we can then deconstruct, mention and show the ones that are limiting their thinking and their construction right now, to reconstruct it in a more positive way to influence how they think, which might even be more conducive to an academic environment, or it could just be that they want to develop how they think in the moment, but it will definitely increase their self-awareness. So, or go read a little books on self-awareness, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. The videos will be, let me try that again. The videos will be uploaded onto what we call our course cafe, and I will I'll just provide like a little bio for our students and some contact details should they want to find out a little bit more about you and your research, if that's all right with you.
It is. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Darren, so much for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you.